Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I see one more of the panelists coming. Hi, Sonam. So, good afternoon. My name is Chandrasekhar Sinha. I'm a global lead for carbon markets and finance at the World Bank. And this is a session on how digital technologies can support and help carbon markets grow. What we'll do right now is, if you do the next slide, just to give you an idea of the rich experience that is there on the panel. You have Masamba, who's been leading the work on digitizing the carbon market and the infrastructure for a long time, not just the carbon market, more broadly as well. Frank from European Space Agency will talk about how some of these systems can support the work on carbon market. Jan Willem, who I'm sure many of you know, leads the work on carbon markets, climate finance at EBRD. Reina leads the work on digital public goods at UNDP. Gemma, my colleague, who leads the work on the Climate Warehouse program at the World Bank. And Sonam, who's one of our avid users of the things that we are developing from Bhutan. He's in the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, newly christened ministry, and he'll talk about it from a user's perspective. But before going into the specific components, let me ask Masamba to give a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Chandra, and good afternoon to our in-person participants, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those that are following us virtually. My name is Masamba Choi. I'm the project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. And on behalf of the Digital4Climate Working Group, I would like to welcome you to this very important side event, how digital technology can support the carbon market. So the Digital4Climate Working Group was put forward by the UNDP, the World Bank, EBRD, and the UNFCCC. And the objective is to fully digitize the activity cycle, an end-to-end automatization of the activity cycle. Basically, what we want is to be able to achieve one of the dreams that we have since a while at the Secretariat, having a woman in the rural area somewhere in Africa using improved cook stove, and simultaneously revenue from carbon credit in the form of digitized currency coming into her digital wallet. This has been considered as a dream for quite a bit of time, but now it seems more and more to be something very much realistic that we can implement on the ground. So this is possible, and the different entities that put forward this Digital4Climate Working Group were already working on different pieces of the puzzle. The four main organizations were dealing with the different aspects. And thanks to the leadership of Chandra, who initiated this collaboration, we come to the understanding that maybe the best way to make progress quickly is to bring together these different pieces of the puzzle, connect them, and then start working from there so that we can achieve our objective very quickly. So in the, let's say, coming months or years. So I will stop there. So very pleased to have you here and looking forward to have very fruitful exchange. And I hand over to Chandra, who will chair this session. Chandra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Masamba, and you'll hear back very soon from Masamba on one element, critical element of the end-to-end digital ecosystem. The partners, as Masamba indicated, in addition to the UNFCCC Secretariat, is UNDP, which is doing a lot of work on registries and the ITMO platform, which digitizes the workflow system. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, where Jan Willem will talk about the digital MRV platforms that EBRD has been working on, and certainly my colleague Gemma will talk about the work that the World Bank is doing under the Climate Warehouse program, including the launch of the Climate Action Data Trust, on which we'll have a separate event on Friday. And then from Frank on European Space Agency's work, and then Sonam and Mbaye. Those of you who are veterans on the negotiations know that for negotiators, the schedule during the negotiation is very uncertain. So we're hoping, Mbaye had warned us, as had Sonam, that they may be late, but Sonam is here. We're hoping Mbaye will join as well. What I wanted to do was to place this, next slide, end-to-end digital ecosystem that many of you are familiar with if you're following us, and it is how we conceive the overall framework of the digital ecosystem that the partners have been working on, and the idea, I think, as Masamba indicated, that we are working on open source, interoperable systems which are modular in nature. So different partners work on different components, but they can all be connected to each other, and all are open source, can be customized. They're free to license, so that we think that as the market develops in terms of its sophistication, customized solutions will be there in specific countries, but at least the starting point is a common framework. And this common framework would support, for instance, the international infrastructure that is being set up by the UNFCCC based on the mandate that they received from parties. So, the mechanism registry, the international registry for 6.2, and so on. But the idea for us is to move towards that dream that Masamba talked about, was to be able to move towards a payment system linked to the project activity, the full value chain on blockchain or digital, whatever platform is appropriate and relevant. And starting point for that is a good MRV system, the physical layer, what you see here, the MRV system, which would rely on a whole range of equipment, sensors, smart meters, Earth observation systems, remote sensing data, drone data, a whole lot of things need to be integrated in the MRV piece. Probably the piece that will require the most work and is most complicated and will need the most amount of effort, because there's no one solution for the whole range of potential mitigation actions that are envisaged. These would then link up with a centralized national level MRV system, where there may be linkages, and certainly should be linkages, to the transparency framework tools that are being developed. And that's another area for us to work more closely with the Secretariat in trying to understand how the physical layer can be connected to the data, the database layer of the MRV, and those then for the carbon market connected to the registry systems. And there would be registries for standards, registries for countries, potentially independently operating registries which countries and standards can use. A whole new set of configuration we expect in the registry layer, let's put it that way. And then the registry layer becomes the basis for the transaction platforms, exchanges, or even it's in the digital form through tokens and wallets. So that's the transaction layer that you see, and all of it anchored by the Climate Action Data Trust, where information from every connected registry utilizing all of the digital MRV is layered in this meta or tree, which is the Climate Action Data Trust, where all of this data ends up and creates the transparency in the overall market. So that's the overall framework that we're thinking of, and certainly we'll hear on different elements on this, starting off with the thing that is on the extreme left, which is the digital methodology. Because if we can achieve the dream of creating using machine learning tools to develop PDDs automatically, Masamba, we can retire in peace, as So over to you to talk about that.
Thank you. Maybe to put a little bit of context, there are some challenges related to the development of climate methodologies. So they need to have the following feature. They need to be broadly applicable, meaning in all countries, in all regions, while being able to accommodate the specificities of the different regions. The requirement in the methodology need to be very much realistic and objective. So objective in the sense that they do not provide room for interpretation. Each requirement need to be pretty clear, very much objective. And then the third aspect is it has to ensure environmental integrity. And we need to have internal consistency in a methodology as well as external consistency among methodologies. This is doable, but most of the time when you achieve all these objectives, you end up with something that is pretty complex. And most of the targeted user will face challenge to use a mechanism with such type of methodology. This is what happened to the CDM. The CDM has developed more than 200 methodologies that were of very high quality, but the main challenge was their complexity. So they were not used in many parts of the world, and we end up with distribution of projects that is not balanced. That was a quite big challenge. Now, several steps were taken in the past to address this issue. So the first of them was the development of default value. So the regulatory body, instead of requiring project developer to calculate some of these parameters, just decide that this is the default value that need to be used. It simplifies, but it's not accurate, and most of the time it is very much conservative. So it means that for the project developer, it means a lot of credit less that are no more accessible. And then we move to the program of activity. So as I said at the beginning, we want broadly applicable methodologies that everybody can use, but at the same time, we want the methodology to be able to accommodate specificities, which is quite challenging. So we introduced program of activity to solve this issue. A program of activity is a methodology with restricted applicability condition. You take one methodology that is broadly applicable and you restrict it to your specific case. And by doing this, you can simplify the program of activity and make it easy to use. This was the first step of simplification after the default value. And then we introduced standardized baseline. The standardized baseline were pre-calculated baseline that are set at the sectoral level in a country, and all project developer can use the same value as baseline. It simplified a lot. But there was still a lot of complexities that were not addressed. And we decided that maybe trying to address the complexity was not the best way to go, because we may end up with things that are too much simplistic and not actually reflecting the reality. So we decided that what is needed is to hide the complexity to the user by shifting the complexity from the user of the mechanism to the regulatory body, so that the user of the mechanism will not see such type of complexity. This is the beginning of our digitization journey. So what is it about exactly? We try to mimic the dialogue and interaction between a consultant hired by a project developer to develop a PDD and a project developer. So we build kind of powerful survey monkey through which the system asks a question to the user to try to figure out the type of activity the user is implementing. You know that in most of our methodology, we have several requirements that are specifically applicable to some condition. So you ask a question to identify what are the specific conditions of the user. And once the system has understood what are the specific conditions of the user, then the system can select the relevant requirement for this type of activity and then request to provide the right data. So the system can set the baseline, the system can check whether the activity is additional, the system will calculate baseline emission, project emission, leakage emission, and finally the emission reduction. So this is ex-ante calculation with the development of a PDD. So we have already digitized fully one methodology, ACM2, which is the most used methodology. And this can be tested. You can go to our website if you have the authorization to do the test. You can enter the parameter of your activity, and the system can generate automatically a PDD for you. So because it's a PDD generated by the system, compliance with the requirement will not need to be checked, because this is PDD generated by a system on the basis of the requirement of the methodology. So it means that moving forward, when it comes to validation, only the data will need to be validated, but not compliance with the requirement in the methodology. It can be also used ex post. It's even easier. So it could generate easily a monitoring plan on the basis of data that have been monitored. And if it is integrated with a system with digital MRV, where you can have the data generated by digital sensor, you can even maybe avoid verification, because the data that have been collected by the sensor will be fed directly into the system. The system will check everything and then calculate the emission reduction. Now, where we are currently, you need to select your methodology. It means that the project developer will still need to go to our website. For example, in the context of the CDM, we have 222 methodology. This is a jungle. The project developer will need to go there and check which of this methodology is the one that is applicable to its activities. So we would like, after this phase, to move to what we call digitized methodology 2.0, where actually the project developer will not have to select the methodology. The system will ask a question, and the system will figure out what is the methodology that is applicable to this specific project. This will improve, but you will still need to revise methodology if the methodologies that are in place are not applicable to your case, or you will even sometimes need to develop completely new methodology because those that exist are not applicable to your specific activity, which is still a challenge for project developer. So the digitized methodology 3.0 that we are currently working on will aim at addressing this issue. This will be completely revolutionary because the system will ask a question to understand what type of activity you are undertaking. And on the fly, the system will develop the methodology that is required for your specific case. So what we will have is a library of module because we have a large number of methodology and we are not yet at a point where we cover all type of activities. But if you look closely to the methodology, you will realize that it's a limited number of modules that are combined in different way that gives a broad range of methodology. If you are able to understand what are these methodology, and then take them out of, what are these modules, and take them out of this methodology, put them in a library, then the system will be able to understand what type of activity you are undertaking and what is the right combination of modules that is required to make a methodology for the assessment of your activity. So of course we will see that it will happen that none of the module, some of the module will be missing, but then we will develop with time. So we will learn and continue to improve at new modules so that more and more we cover a large number of activity. I will stop there and over to you.
So, Nicola, certainly you have one client right there. So excellent. Ms. Samba, we all know it's extremely exciting, and those of us who've been in the business are really looking forward to the full functionality. But let me, in the interest of time, turn to Jan Willem. Jan Willem, over to you on the digital MRV.
Okay. Thanks, Chandra. Yeah, the digital MRV, and good afternoon to all. So basically, we started this development in EBRD a couple of years ago. It was partly born in frustration, meaning we let's say we're in the heydays of the JI and CDM. We were running a couple of carbon funds, and we were paying quite a bit of money on verification processes, etc. And that's high, and it was also long-winded, meaning that it took, if not years, to get the results out, and that you could pay our clients, because we were buying carbon credits from clients of the EBRD. And yeah, that the fact that there was such a big gap between the investment and the reward was not helpful also to kind of convince our, let's say, loan officers, bankers, that this is something that really helps to accelerate and scale up these, both the market as well as the project side. That's the ultimate game, to accelerate the transition to green, and you do that through implementing and investing in projects. So we then said, okay, let's start. We found some money from a donor from Spain, and we started to develop this idea of a digital MRV. Again, in previous time, you have all these technological equipment that is generating already a lot of industrial data, so to say. And then you have people that write down what they see on the screen, and then it is being transferred to other people that try to read what the other people have written, and mistakes are being made, and etc. And that then leads to a lot of delays. So it's better to pull the kind of the data from the machines directly, and then bring it into a big database, and then define intelligent algorithms to process the data. Let me put it this way: the machines are not always right. Yeah, so that means that the meter can be off, or there can be let's say, the disturbances on the signal and etc. So all of that can be looked into, but then at least you have an evidence base and also an ability to automate that processing of the data. So, and the other idea was that we trying to put everything in one system so that the system could be verified rather than a verification per monitoring report. Because if the system is well set up and verified, then you should be able to automatically rely on the eventual carbon reduction number that is coming out of the system. And let's say all subsequent, and I think we are onto something very fundamental, because there's a lot of work being done on kind of tokenizing and let's say using cryptocurrencies for subsequent steps. But if you don't do the monitoring in the project right, then everything else is it's the famous garbage in, garbage out type of philosophy. So this is exactly what we try to address. Now, we also looked at this not so much, let's say we see, and I think that will be increasingly important. So the MDB system as a whole is a very big contributor to the whole climate finance agenda. But eventually, it's about the results that we achieve. And again, to have proper impact and result monitoring is going to be very important. So also in that sense, this type of systems can play an important role in reducing, let's say, the impact results we have to report to our stakeholders, etc., so that we show in a high confident way that we are achieving the results, and that we're not just doing projects that become eventually, let's say, white elephants. No, these are really working elephants that help to contribute to abate the climate problem. So, yeah, what can I say further on this one? So we start with the measurement equipment on site. Then we collect that and regular polling of the data, and then it goes into a database that is, I always hackle over the word, immutable, which is the basically making sure your base data, no one else can touch it, and then it's further processed in accordance with the algorithm, which is to the biggest extent being determined by the MRV protocols from the methodologies. And then there is, of course, the reporting. Now, we try to make the verification as automated as possible, so any hiccup in getting the data, that's then being flagged in the system, and then we can look into what happened. And of course, that eventually lead to some judgment, but that is then all documented, so people can go back and see what happened, and eventually it leads to a report, automatic MRV report, that then could be sent off to registries and for issuance. How do I get to the next slide? So we now going into kind of a next phase where we need to connect the project to the national inventories. And there's also a mutual communication. So some of the data of the national registries or emission authorities would need to come back to the project. For example, if you could start with very dynamic grid emission factors. So if there's a very large uptake in a country of new renewables, then it could affect over time, let's say, the grid emission factor. And also, you also want a single ID number for such a project, so that there's no confusion as to who has that installation. But then, in return, the monitoring reports could be sent to the registry also in an automated way, and then the verification, etc., or high confidence MRV reports could be sent to the registry. Next slide. Gemma, you're handling the clicker. Okay. Oh, I thought I had 3 slides. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jan Willem. Some of your thoughts got automated there. Just to put the linkages, Masamba talked about ACM02 getting digitized, and the digital MRV that EBRD worked on is also on ACM02. I think you're beginning to see that our hope would be by the end of the year, maybe we'll be able to show the automation that we've been talking about in a sample project, and all of that would go into a registry, and which is what Reina and the UNDP team has been working on. So over to you, Reina, on the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Chandra. So maybe I think the beauty of this working group is that we're coming from slightly different backgrounds and how should I say, visions. And from UNDP, I just wanted to start from saying that we are supporting more than 120 countries from a nationally determined contribution implementation support angle. And a part of this, or a big part of this, is really for the enabling activities, including supporting on the regulatory frameworks for Article 6, and also facilitating Article 6.2 project development, as well as capacity building on the enhanced transparency framework, which really underpins the trust behind what we're all doing. And so based on this experience, we're really trying to contribute to this digital ecosystem, which is, again, a great word, in 2 ways. And the first one is the slide you see, which is the bilateral cooperation platform. So this is based on a project with Switzerland, where each country can basically become a member of this platform and configure it in a way so that it reflects the agreement and the process flow that needs to happen in order for a transfer of ITMO to happen, or any carbon credit to happen. And by having this in a configurable way, in theory, if a new country comes on board, they can start up their own page in this platform. And then if there's another donor country that comes on board, the donor side can also have their the buyer side can also have their page and make sure that the process flow goes through instead of everything going back and forth, again, on emails or through phone calls. So that is the I think in the bigger picture, it was on the bottom, you might have seen the process flow part. And then the second part of it is the next slide. Gemma, thank you. So this is coming from another angle, which is a modular national transparency system. So again, from UNDP, we are trying to build the capacity of the national governments that we support. And we have noticed that many countries were asking for support to build transparency systems and carbon registries really popping up everywhere. And we also noticed most of them had very similar functionality requests, very naturally, because we're all working around the same standards and guidelines. So based on this, we came up with this, we applied the digital public good approach, meaning that it will be an open source code base, well documented, so that any new country that wants to start their own registry or own national MRV system, they can start from installing that into their own server space, and then configuring it based on their context, such as the institutional setting or their regulatory framework. And so this is how we wanted to approach this, and it's really nice that we are all putting together our heads and trying to build this up together so that other institutions, not only in the working group, but anybody else can also start to use this system together. And there are 2 things that we're really trying to put forward. One is interoperability. We do tend to start to think we need a huge system as a government to make sure everything happens correctly, but instead we really want to make sure that it is interoperable, meaning we don't do everything ourselves, we try to make others do the work. So I'm really glad that Jan is doing all the DR MRB, and then there's the metadata layer, which will come up after this, so that this system, the government system, doesn't have to do everything. And the other part, again, it's really similar to this, is about making sure we start to think about data standards. And again, the objective of this is so that others can innovate on top of this digital public infrastructure as a government. So the ideal situation is that in your country, you would have many DRMRB companies standing up, and there's a lot of developers starting their own new ways of digitalizing their businesses. And that's what this digital public good or infrastructure national system is trying to achieve. So we're really at the small center of the picture. Thank you, Chandra.
Thanks, Reina. And I do want to emphasize the significance of the process automation part. This it tends to be the highest transaction cost element in many developing countries with low capacity. And the automation on a web-based tool, which allows the government to transparently, or the regulator to transparently put forward the process that would be followed, I think is a very, very important process. And if you, again, putting it all together, you have digital methodology, which creates a digital MRV, all of which is automated on a process flow, goes into a digital registry system, and potentially reduces your cost for validation, verification, or as Masamba was saying, potentially eliminates the need for validation and dramatically reduces the need for verification. Particularly with digital MRV, you're already probably attacking 70-80% of the transaction cost if you've included the process flow in a transparent manner. So after that, Gemma, what happens?
Great. So now it's a very good segue to move to what the World Bank is working on open source infrastructure. So we witness every day how carbon markets keep changing, and with them the technical and the policy requirements around accounting, reporting, and tracking. And so in this fast evolving context, countries need to be prepared. Countries need to equip themselves and have the tools to be following up this space. And so in this context and to this end, the World Bank created the Climate Warehouse Program, which on the first pillar in the left, it builds, develops, tests, and prototypes digital public goods around carbon markets to help scale them up, including digital MRV, including registries, including the metadata layer that we tested called the Climate Action Data Trust, the tokenization engine, and others. And on the second side, we also not only provide prototyping and testing and developing public goods, but we provide capacity building. Basically, in the capacity building, we help countries define the infrastructure strategy. So what are the needs? What are the requirements? Does this country need an MRV or a registry, or both? If it needs a registry, do we need a register or a transaction registry? If the data is published, in which frequency, and how it's going to be maintained? And in the process flow, who's going to be validating, approving, and transferring the processes? So all these definitions of requirements are in the capacity building, as well as defining the budget, the regulatory support, and so on. So these are the two pillars in which the Climate Warehouse operates. And for today, and just to be mindful of the time, we're going to be focusing on the two open source registries that the World Bank has been building. Because based on our experience with developing countries, we have seen the lack of capacity, the lack of resources, and therefore we designed these open source registries based on these needs. So one is the core registry. Together with Shia Network, the World Bank is building an open source registry using blockchain technology, which basically covers the basic functionalities of Article 6, and also it adds a tokenization mechanism. Basically, you can digitize the carbon credits and trade them, store them in a blockchain platform to enable a more agile and innovative way of transacting credits. It's also connected to the Climate Action Data Trust, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And then the second registry that we offer to countries is called Enhanced Registry. And the Enhanced Registry expands the functionalities of the core registry. It's a bit more sophisticated, having embedded a national MRV system, which allows you to track project work streams, create project types, methodologies, and in some cases, linking it to the GAG inventory. So basically, these are the two registries that we have been building. The core registry has an automatic sync to the Climate Action Data Trust. The Enhanced Registry can build a connection through an API. For those of you who are not familiar with the Climate Action Data Trust, first I would really encourage you to attend the event on Friday because we're going to deep dive on this platform. But basically, it's the global platform that we launched in December together with the World Bank, IETA, and the government of Singapore, and aims to connect, aggregate, and harmonize the carbon credit data across the world, connecting all the registries in one place and having a common taxonomy where emission reductions data is comparable, is real-time, and is accessible to also the service layer, providers that can do analytics, ratings, and certification. So it's transformative, and it's going to be changing the paradigm in the carbon markets because we will have access to high-quality data in this space. So this is from our side. I will just pause here and over to Chandra.
Thanks, Yama. And the core registry and the enhanced registry and the standard registry of the UNDP. Just wanted to make sure that there are 3 open source digital public good for registry offering, because what we've discovered over the years, certainly over the last few months, is that countries do want control on their own registry systems, which is where the title to the emission reductions are held. And that's an area where we're trying to offer the level of support and sophistication that is relevant for the country concerned. So the core registry, simplest one, get it off to a start. Automatically, account management is through wallets, tokens, and so on, with the standard registry of the UNDP having the kind of features that Reina was talking about, linking to the national MRV system, with the enhanced registry to the digital MRV system of the type that Jan Willem was talking about. And potentially how this all links to Earth observation systems. And Frank is going to tell us how that is going to totally transform at least a big part of the market.
Thanks a lot for handing over to me. Well, as I said, as you heard before, I'm coming from Science, Application and Climate Department of ESA's Earth Observation Center in Frascati, that is in Italy, close to Rome. And together with the European Commission, we build up the Copernicus system. That is one of the space flagships for Europe. It provides huge amount of data. Currently, we have 7 satellites in orbit, and they're providing 250 terabyte of data per day. All the data are fully free, with a fully free and open data policy, not only for Europeans, but for every citizen on the world. Within this science application and climate, we are promoting the use of Earth observation data, promoting to derive information which is then worked on within systems to give ultimately information, specific information on topic level. We are working generally on science, the science underpinning the climate change understanding. That's our climate change initiative. There you see huge global data sets on essential climate variables. We just released the latest version, version 4, of our biomass data, global biomass data for all the globe from 2010, 17, 18, 19, 20, to give an evolution of what is happening globally. This can be broken down on a continental level, and it can be broken down towards national level. I would not break it down yet on the local level, and that's where we have to go. But so that's work in progress. Related to this, collaboration is key. ESA is collaborating with many UN organizations, all which are here on the board, UNFCCC, UNDP, UNEP, FAO, but as well with the international financial institutions like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. So, what can EO data provide? EO data can provide transparency. EO data are available for everybody. Everybody can look at it and compare what was reported. It can add, and that is very much important with respect to the discussions which we heard during the last couple of months related to the credibility of carbon credits. We think Earth observation can provide credibility towards what is happening on the carbon market. We see new possibilities, capabilities within the IT sector, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. That will be all used to build up the system of your dream. Such a system can only work if it's built on trust. And sorry to say, but I would disagree on this automatic verification. I would not trust a black box. I would like to see to have a possibility to validate and verify as well from my perspective. Talking about my perspective, that should be the perspective of every citizen who is concerned about our climate change. We see within the carbon huge variation in the price of carbon credits. 1 ton of carbon ranges between a couple of euros or dollars towards hundreds of dollars or euros. These depend very much how they are somehow generated. And I would like to connect carbon credits with as well other factors. Factors like biodiversity, the protection of the environment, the protection of nature, but as well indigenous people, because it is about the ownership of those type of information on their environment, on their livelihood. And only if there is ownership and if there's benefit for them, then we can be sure it will not only be a carbon accounted until the next billing period, but it will last, and we'll have to look for something which is lasting. Otherwise, we are not really helping our planet to survive. So this system needs to be inclusive. Cannot be just this black box. And related to this, I said we need a lot of cooperation. We need to bring the people from the different sectors together. We are organizing from the 3rd to the 5th October in Frascati, that's where the Earth Observation Center is based, south of Rome, an Earth Observation for Carbon Market Forum. And I would like to invite all of you to come and discuss with people from the financial sector, with people from the regulators, people coming from a technical part, people thinking about systems, to identify gaps, to approach a common language, to move forward, because we have to move forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Frank, and a little bit of disbelief or discussion around how far we can go is always healthy, because all of us are aware that the technology cannot solve everything. In fact, it can lead to systemic failures as well, and I'm sure Masamba will agree on that as well. It's a question of how do you simplify and how do you build in the underlying protections and safeguards. And when we say no verification, it doesn't mean no verification at all. It means no verification as the way we all have been used to no verification. It doesn't mean the software doesn't get audited. It doesn't mean that there are no audits, a whole range of possibilities. But those of us who were in the carbon market are traumatized by the experience of, as Jan Willem said, for investment to be made and payments to be made against outcomes delivered. And that's the part we are trying to solve. At least that's our goal. But now we want to hear from, how this potentially can help countries with their efforts to scale climate ambition and use carbon markets to drive climate finance.
Thank you, Chandra and Gemma, for the invitation to participate, and also just want to thank the fellow panelists for sharing their experience. So what I'm going to do is, I've made some notes listening to everyone. I'm not going to summarize, but just while sharing our experience, and in this case, see, my country's experience has been one. We've been working with the World Bank, IETA, Singapore, the Climate Action Data Trust. And then an investment agency of the government has also been, I won't say, it's not the right word to say playing around, but they've been also looking into developing a digital trading platform. And also, so it's from these experiences and then our own role here in the negotiations and all that. So, but to start off, it's interesting when the European Space Agency was mentioning about, citing Copernicus, the satellite observatory. From what I remember is Copernicus is the man who who really proved that the sun is the center of the universe, if my history serves me right. So, and I think this is where it's a good time to discuss this, because the data infrastructure for the market is, I would say it's at the heart of the market mechanism. And this has been very useful because yesterday, UNFCCC in the room just diagonally opposite this, they were presenting our registries, and a lot of things looked familiar for some of us who've been involved in this. And I think I need to thank a lot of friends over here, starting from the audience and here. And then also today before coming here, and why some of us are delayed or why I couldn't make it also, is that under Article 6.2, there's a whole discussion of registries that were taking place. And what's interesting is, at least from my observation, is that the difference in the registries discussions is now, it's really not technical, it's more of policy differences between countries and all. I think the technicalities of interoperability and how it should work and everything's actually, it's not rocket science anymore. And then, anyhow, so just going to, so some of, from my country's experience, some of the key challenges that a country has before you get into this market is really, one, you have the software challenges in terms of getting your institutional framework, your policies in place. And again, that is, it's not the easiest thing, but it is a lot easier to do that. Then we have to look into the other infrastructure, or the hard infrastructure. And this I'm really meaning the data infrastructure and all that, just now what our colleagues and all have been presenting, and really arrangements of how do you monitor, account, you avoid double counting, and then building the overall infrastructure and all. And this is where the Climate Action Data Trust experience of where Bhutan has been participating has become very, very useful. I would say that the role of digital innovation and the use of digital tech in the carbon markets is, I think it's a game changer for many developing countries, definitely for mine, where we've not been active in CDM, but I think the role of tech is really allowing us really to catch up, to come to speed, to do many things that we could not in the past yet. And then really, it's about, it allows us to leapfrog the whole learning curve, but again, leapfrogging in terms of setting up, but we have to be active in the markets and all. And then, and for my experience of the CAD Trust, a lot more can be done, and this is where we've been discussing with the World Bank and others on how we can really, can the CAD Trust help Bhutan build its own national registry. My experience in this, definitely yes. The foundations of what is required for a national registry, it's there in the CAD Trust. It really covers everything. I really want, it's in compliance with what Article 6 requires. Though right now is informational and so on. And then one of the good things about the CAD Trust is that, at least again, from my experience, it brings together a lot of countries, public and private sector agencies that we see, to share information about credits and then and projects across digital platforms. And hopefully in the coming years, it will allow the integration of multiple registry systems using standardized data models, as the market develops. And this is something which, if you all were there in the room about half an hour ago, this was the discussion going on, integrations, interoperability, and then transactions. Though there are different views on this, but again, the difference is not about the building blocks, but it's really on policy matters and all. Yeah. And then then, again, on the CAD trust, I mean, sorry, I don't want to seem biased to the CAD trust, I mean, because this is where we've been working a lot with, is that we do see this also as a one-stop source of information regarding, even for the compliance and voluntary markets and all. And then when you talk about the integrity of markets, again, this is where we see, again, we've heard, right, from all the panelists here also that the using of digital innovation and tools to really bring about the trust and confidence. And this, again, just sharing my experience from the negotiating room, co-facilitating as well as representing my country, and then also working on all this, is that there are difference of opinions right now when you talk even at a technical level, that, a lot of people feel that using of all this emerging technologies and all, that there's still a technology black box, that we don't know what it is, but I think from my country's experience, we are pretty confident that a lot of the so-called uncertainties, a lot of the things that we have to take care of, that the technical solutions are there. And as one of my colleagues, one of our colleagues here just mentioned, is the key is this, that no matter what you use, right, is that you have to take care of at the point of data entry, right? It's basically garbage in, garbage out. And this is something which we've been talking to a lot of people, like when you talk about blockchain, one of the questions that we face is, because of this whole immutability and all that, and then when people talk about that, that we don't know what it is, but what we've been always telling people is that, look, it's just like a paper registry, that if you don't take care of what goes in, what comes out is also, so some of the old school way of doing things, we still, those principles still prevail on how the digital platforms emerge and develop. And then so it's basically, do I have time again? Okay, just so, and then also, again, from a government perspective, from a regulator's perspective also, what we see from the digital initiatives that we've been getting into is that we do see use for it, for governments, for project developers, for independent standards, and to verification bodies, as well as to traders, the credit traders, and even to the UNFCCC to benefit from a lot of the aggregation of data and all. We see efficiencies there. We see better ways of doing things. But is there a lot of work to be done? Definitely, yes. That, and that then the issues of capacity building and all that was raised right now. Also, I think was it from the UNFCCC Secretariat that as you move forward, and then the ESCs. This is something which most of us, again, for a lot of people who are what you call the market people, and then into working into all this tech stuff, is that we do sometimes forget some of the, I won't say forget, but we overlook some of the softer sides of this whole market, right? ESC is mentioning about inclusivity, and to make sure that, basically the social aspects of what the market might impact needs to be taken care of. And this is something which hopefully we will see as these systems are being developed and as you move forward on this, yeah. And so, I'll just, and then just again, just to summarize, I think the Climate Action Data Trust that we're working on, as well as some of these other digital initiatives, hopefully, nationally, we hope that it will help us mobilize climate action, to achieve some of the goals of the Paris Agreement, while also ensuring environmental integrity and transparency. And then just think, what sometimes we joke within ourselves for those, when we talk about immutability of data keeps coming up now and then. But what we're saying is, along with that, let's hope that immutability also means that the work on this digitization is immutable, and that we just move forward, and that we don't go to Excel spreadsheets to get to doing things here. Thank you, Chan.
Thanks, Sonam. So you've heard the full description of. You want to come in?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to give the opportunity to the audience, and you can take the first question, Jan Willem. So go ahead, Neil. We'll take 3 questions. So you start there, and then there, and then there. 3.
First of all, thank you for leading and showing that decentralization can actually come from the authorities, so that, you know, decentralization should be about empowerment and inclusiveness, and including these critical authorities that you all represent, so that we can avoid the dark side and the nefarious activity and use it for positivity. We all know that that's critical. And it's really great to set the standards as well, so that we can kind of get through what works and what is good in open source technology, and then let everyone else see that path and focus on putting money back into the projects, into doing what we really should be focusing on, is actually implementing. A question I just had was regarding, you know, if we're looking at Article 6 first and Article 6.2, are we also looking to take this to Article 6.4 and beyond? What are the intentions?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks so much for all the panelists. Poria, Head of Research and Innovation Team at ICLEI World Secretariat, and Co-Chair of Research and Innovation at Global Covenant of Mayors. Here's my question for this panel. It's been already a couple of years that there is an established understanding among the community of experts who are working at the interface of digital technology and carbon market that leveraging blockchain technology will enable a better access to carbon market and support the expansion of this market by making it less exclusive, but also reducing the transaction costs. On the other hand, we see today that this solution has not been implemented at a scale that is needed, while we know how game-changing could be. So I would love to understand from your perspective, what are the fundamental barriers for this solution not being to the scale that is needed implemented, but also how we can tackle that? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Colin Nalden. I work for the University of Bristol, University of Oxford, and the University of Southern Denmark. My question follows on from the last question, talking about transaction costs and registries. So we're seeing lots of subnational entities trying to establish quite ambitious net zero targets, but there's no way of aligning their ambition with NDCs. Do you see any possibility of these digital registries providing the infrastructure which will enable this alignment and allow these subnational entities to attract international climate finance across jurisdictions? Thank you.
Okay, Jan Willem, go for it. So there were three questions. Whether this applies to 6.4. Second is how can we scale up the blockchain application for carbon markets we've been talking about for a long time. And the third one is linked to the use of registries for scaling up ambition. It was in the context of subnational, but in general. You can take one.
Yeah. Well, then first allow me to talk a little on the black box. So in my view, that's not a black box. It's a glass box. So everyone should be able to look into. Black boxes, you only use them when things go horribly wrong. So that's. No, let's say I will on the last question. Of course, there's a relationship between NDCs and the whole accounting, and of course the kind of the carbon budget transfers that may happen then between countries will affect what type of use for that carbon space, if there's anything left, how that can play out. But it's basically proper registries is probably more like an enabler than because the targets, the reduction targets, is a political decision. And now, on the other hand, yeah, we all strive towards a below 1.5 degrees scenario, of course, and we also know that a lot of NDCs are not yet up to that. So I think purely linking it to NDCs may not be the best of strategies for baseline setting. I would rather think that as to baseline setting, you think about a net zero strategy by a certain date, and your baseline for that sector is just a linear regression on the carbon emission factor, for example, in the power sector. Because otherwise you're not really real about achieving the net zero. Thank you.
Masamba, do you want to take the one on 6.4 and applying emerging technologies for 6.4?
Yeah, so actually all this emerging technology can and should be applied also to support 6.4 as well as 6.2. So in the case of digitized methodology, it has been developed in the context of the CDM, but it has been developed, let's say, in a very flexible manner, and it can accommodate whatever type of methodology you are developing. So we expect that the Article 6.4 methodologies will be also digitized. So, and all these, let's say, systems that we are trying to build with this end-to-end digitization is meant to serve Article 6, 6.2, and 6.4. So if you allow, Chair, I would like just to also talk about this block and transparent box. I think the main idea is that what is the mindset that we have? Do we have a moonshot mindset where we focus on what is needed? Or should we have a mindset that is focusing on what is perceived as possible? Me, I'm very optimistic, and I have a rather moonshot mindset, and my focus is on what is needed. And I truly think that this is possible to have a system developed where you will not need to do verification on the ground. Yes, the system will need to be verified, and we can even think about situation where the system will verify itself with all the development that we are having currently with the digital technology. Saying this is not possible, I think is a little bit too risky. Let's leave things open.
Okay, Masamba, but I really liked Jan Wilhelm's glass box. You can't touch it, but you can see what's happening inside, as opposed to a black box, which you try to open once things go horribly wrong. So let's talk about the whole digital MRV and the digitization.
I'm really happy to hear about a transparent glass and box.
That's what we are building. The digital ecosystem is a transparent glass box. You can't meddle with it, but you can see what's happening. Okay. Okay. And on the last question, I think why has this not happened much faster? I'll start off, and if somebody has any opinion, I'm happy to hear it. My own view is it's a standard incumbent problem, that the current carbon market is dominated by a few big players who don't see the advantages to this. A lot of the innovation that's taking place is among the smaller standards who have innovated on the systems and technology, but have not achieved the kind of scale that is necessary for you to notice it. So we're beginning to see Vera and Gold Standard, for instance, actively engage in the digital MRV space, in the digitalization process. So it'll begin to happen, but it was a standard incumbent issue. On Article 6 itself, it's you have to wait for guidance from parties, and it's a slower, more deliberate kind of a process, and that's the way it's been designed, and one has to follow through on that. So that is my own view on it. I don't know if anybody has anything else, but we can open up for a second round of questions. And I knew, even without looking in that direction, that the moment Jan Wilhelm made a point about baselines, that Axel cannot keep it. Go for it, Axel.
Yes, thank you very much, Axel Michaelova from Perspectives at the University of Zurich. So my question would exactly relate to baseline setting. We know that there are certain parameters where you need to have an understanding of the specific availability of resources on the ground. And I'm wondering, how can we ensure that a fully digitalized system actually is able to understand how this specific situation on the ground is? So somehow this system, which is completely devoid from ground truthing, I don't believe it can work. We can simplify many steps, but at some point we need to do ground truthing for certain key parameters.
Absolutely, Axel. And I think you missed the presentation by the European Space Agency on Earth observation systems for one aspect of trying to get some of that information. But I certainly, you know, we're talking about the moonshot, as Masamba said. We're not talking about, you know, in order to get to the Mars, you need to launch the first Starship. So let's recognize where we have to go and recognize that it is going to be a process, and there'll be many benefits along the way. But we're not saying that you know, we'll be signing up for the ticket to Mars tomorrow. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Luca and David.
Thank you very much. I'm Luca Lore from the IEA. First of all, congratulations to the partners of this initiative, which is really impressive. I'm particularly also intrigued by Masamba's Digitalization 3.0. And if you allow me, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is whether the system would be able to create new methodologies, also new technologies that, or it would be sort of generative based on the existing methodologies. Then whether it would have the capability to customize the methodology depending on the standard, whether it's Article 6.4 mechanism or gold standard, etc. Similar to Axel's point, like whether there would be a role for human verification of those methodologies before being implemented. And finally, whether you have a timeline already in mind for implementation. Thanks.
Thanks, Luca. And the last question, David.
Hi there, David Marriage, PwC, and Rewide Earth. It's just a quick question. As you start to get the data sets that you all have in terms of the Earth observations from the space data, but also the methodologies, are you looking at also essentially identifying the next best action? You know, if you start to identify those projects that are productive and doing the right things and creating the right sorts of outcomes, arguably you've got the data to create the identification of a list of, in order, the best projects to do. So you identify using the data sets, almost to reverse engineer. These are the sites that we should be working on next. I just wondered whether that's something that you're looking at collectively in terms of almost rather than waiting for things to come in, identifying the opportunities that give best bang for buck for the global economy as opposed to, you know, local initiatives. Just a thought.
Thanks. So I'll make that into a more general question, like what is the next big thing you're looking at, and use that to conclude the panel. But starting with Masamba, specific Luca's question, and any concluding thoughts on where we will be going, and we'll come down the panel this way.
Yeah. No, thank you, Luca, for your question. Extremely important. Yes, the system is able to indeed create new methodology, but out of modules that are already existing in the current methodologies. So the approach that we will take the existing methodology and extract from this methodology the different module. But there are some combination of these modules that are not existing currently. So the system will be able to generate this new methodology. More importantly, if there is an activity for which there is a missing module, because it will happen. We are not able to figure out all type of situation ex ante. So we will be able to know that this is the module that is missing, develop that module and add it to the library. And, you know, it solves a lot of problems. So it solves the issue of methodology revision. The system can handle that very easily. And the development of new methodology is quite challenging and expensive, particularly for developing countries. So it will, let's say, shift some of this burden to the regulatory body, and what will be left with them will be extremely limited. So can it customize methodology for different scheme? Yes. The way, as I mentioned, it's a very powerful SurveyMonkey tool. So we can have a situation where you start by signaling what is the scheme in which you are operating. So for example, you can say UNFCCC Article 6.4 or gold standard or another scheme. And then what we'll do, because it's just powerful SurveyMonkey, so the system will be able, we will be able to develop coding for this different scheme and mimic consultant that would, for example, interact with a project developer under gold standard or under the UNFCCC or under another scheme. So the verification, what we plan to do is, at least this is what we will recommend, you will need to run in parallel the digitized system and the manual system for some time and double check whether the digitized system is delivering what the manual system can deliver. And if there is any discrepancy, so it means that we need to work on the digitized system.
I think we run out of time, so 30 seconds or 15 if possible from each of the panelists to conclude. Frank?
Well, looking forward to collaborate on a transparent block system, glass and block, and yes, as well with ground truth data, because we need that to develop the new and performant technologies and methodologies.
Well, it's a bit different. Proper targets, proper baselines, and we need. I think we can do a lot if we also work on the demand side of the question, because without demand, without an economic valorization of the reductions, we can't move much more forward. Yeah.
Maybe. Thank you so much. And again, I think it's really important to see how the climate finance can actually reach the local communities. There was a gentleman who spoke about that as well. So I think this is really a start. This could be also a forum where digital technologies and the exploration that we're doing can also feed into the methodology in the future. So I'm looking forward to continuing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, the audience, for bearing with us until now. When you put carbon markets and technology together, it can get quite heavy. But our next step from the World Bank is to sandboxing and testing the registry with our country clients, and also carbon market participants are welcome to test it as well. So thank you, and over to you, Chandra.
Thank you. I won't take any more time because we are over the limit and probably there is another event. So thank you again, and join me in giving a round of applause to the panelists.